All right. As artists, I think we're always changing and growing. What we see influences us, and what we see others doing influences us, and I'm no exception. I thought I'd share a little bit about the journey I took when I started moving my work toward abstraction. And I'm just going to jump right in with some of the things that I felt, and I want to know if this sounds like any of you, whether you have any of these questions. And if you've had any of these thoughts, I'd like you to type them into the comments. So the first one, how does a realistic painter loosen up, getting away from what you see and showing what you feel? How do you even begin an abstract painter? If you've thought number one or number two, type those things in the comments for me. How do you know whether or not what you did is any good? And I'm looking for my comments here. Dismiss, there we go. How do you know which techniques to use and when? So I'm looking for the comments now. They all disappeared when I started to share my screen. Are you seeing any comments, Arlene? Maybe you could tell me.
When I click on the chat, I can see all the comments.
How many people are typing in numbers there?
Oh boy, a bunch. It's not giving me a number. About 6 or 8 people so far.
Okay, okay. So
the numbers are growing.
Okay. Oh, there it is. That's where it is. Comments, chat. That's where it is. Okay. My journey. I grew up in a small farmhouse between Portland and Eugene in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. This is a photo of it. And I went to school, and I started out as a science major and finally decided to graduate in English education. And I taught high school English for about 5 years while I was going to graduate school and working full time. And then our first child was born in 1988, sorry. And I was suddenly staying at home with an infant and no longer studying, no longer teaching. And I really felt like I needed some kind of intellectual stimulation. And I started to study watercolor. On Monday nights, I got to miss Monday night football. And I really enjoyed the sense of accomplishment that painting gave me. I could see a small bit of progress with every painting. When my teacher retired from the community ed department in 1991, she recommended that I take over her classes. And that really taught me a lot. I was a realistic painter, and I had to explain why I was doing what I was doing, and I had to plan more in advance because I knew I was going to be instructing. And one of the things that I wanted to do besides paint realism was to include emotion and content in my paintings. I wasn't just after something that looked good. I wanted some kind of communication of emotion. And in 1993, my grandmother passed away at age 102, and I was named after her, born on her birthday. I felt a strong connection with her. And I started including items of hers in the still life paintings. So this particular image is called A Light Note, and includes sheet music of hers that was really aged, almost to the point of crumbling. I saw a lot of success with these paintings, and I enjoyed doing them very much. And I don't see anything wrong with realism at all. I really enjoy looking at a very good realistic painting. Here's another one from 1998. Again, experimenting with things that my grandmother had left behind, her fountain pen, her mahjong set, and more lemons. These kind of became a touch point for me. In this particular image, I was exploring the idea of a game we played as a child, encoding secret messages. We would write with the lemon juice and it was invisible, but when you held it to a light bulb and heated it lightly, it became visible. I like to imply symbolism with my work, from realism to abstraction. Here's another still life, similar ideas. And this includes a bird cage and some books of fairy tales that I was reading to my children. This particular fairy tale is called The Nightingale. And leaning against the bird cage is a photograph of my father standing in the doorway of a barn. And I want you to be on the lookout for that in some of the other paintings that I show. Shortly after this, my dad passed away, and he left behind some things that my grandmother had, some photographs that were just sort of loose, and my sisters and I divided them up. And this is in 1994. I began to use some abstraction, simplifying these figures. This was the photo that sort of spurred it on. These women were on the prairie in Plentywood, Montana in 1921. And I was really struck by their expressions. They were sort of perky and confident. And yet they looked very weather beaten, and the house was very simple and plain. And then they had this delicate little bird cage. And at the time, I had a bird in a bird cage. I had a canary. And I felt like it was a message from beyond from my grandmother. So I started painting them. I changed the color, obviously. I simplified the figures, changed their shapes, made them kind of ghostly, as if they were sending me a message from the past. I kept exploring this subject, the same subject, over the years. And in 2000, I entered this painting, Voices of Time, in the National Watercolor Society. And it won an award and got me my signature membership. So you can see from painting to painting how this work evolved. I changed the shapes, I changed the colors. I moved the birdcage off to the far right. And I was still after expressing this connection and support that women give each other. And I thought it was particularly appropriate to share this with a group of women artists. I kept painting them and kept painting them more and more from my imagination, leaning less and less on the photograph. And so these abstracted figures became really fun for me to do. And I worked at it for a long time. Here's another one. This one actually was spurred by visiting an artist friend who was showing me her framing setup. And we went out into her garage, and she had a fox fur hanging from the rafters of her garage. And it was just exactly like the one my grandmother had had in her closet, where the little mouth bites the tail and the feet have snaps on them. And it was attractive and repulsive to us as kids. And we were fascinated and horrified at the same time. But it really, really put me back in my grandmother's closet playing dress up. And I tried to imagine what she would have looked like in that era when she wore that. So I used repeated shapes in this, echoing those ovals in her hat, in her face, in her shoulders, and then contrasting them with the pointy ears and nose. Also, I wanted to use sort of nostalgic colors that reminded me of a bygone era. This is a painting that I've used a reference photo of my dad on the farm. I did it in 2001. And about this time, he took me out for a drive in the pickup, and he asked me not to let my mother sell the farm. He did not want her to move away from the farm or sell it. One facet of his personality was that he was intimidating, and he was also passionate. And I feel like this painting expresses both of those. The photograph that I worked from was black and white, but I tried to use colors that fit his personality. I also explored other family members. This is done from a reference photo of my husband's grandmother and his great-grandmother. And I was still trying to paint the influence of the family tree. And one instructor I took from encouraged me to do surreal work that implied content by juxtaposing real elements and unreal elements. So you can see in this image that the tree has an eyeball shape in it and a clock shape in its trunk. And there are symbols for DNA, X and Y chromosomes, and music. And that I've made the figures sort of blending into the background in some ways. I enjoy realism, and I sometimes go back to surrealism. This is done in 2018. But it doesn't always feel natural to me. It doesn't feel like the way that I would naturally approach a painting. I'm always a little hampered by whether it's right or wrong. This one is also about my dad. It's called After Midnight. And so I've used the symbol of the owl because he liked to stay up late reading and drinking and smoking. I also painted what I would call self-portraits, although this doesn't really look like me. This is called The Farmer's Daughter, and it was influenced by a lecture I heard by Randy Pausch, who wrote a book called The Last Lecture about his battle with pancreatic cancer. And in that lecture, he talked about people being more happy to work with a Tigger, an excited character, than an Eeyore, who's always, woe is me. And so in this image, I painted this donkey, which was very dear to my heart. We grew up with a donkey in our family. We had a little white donkey named Bill. And instead of making this donkey white, I made him orange to reference the orange of Tigger, the happier color. And I painted several of these. Here's another one. In this image, I have the bluebird of happiness keeping my inner Eeyore away. And I've abstracted the figure quite a bit more. One of the things you can do if you're interested in abstracting but still keeping the realism is to flatten these figures into just shape with very little indication of form. So there's a small indication of form in the face, but really the figure is treated as a flat shape. In 2010, we moved to Oregon City and decided to not buy my parents' farm. And our kids were off to college, and I was starting to imagine what it would be like to be just a couple again without a family around. And I did a series of paintings called Contented Solitude. In this series, I was exploring more realism, still abstracted, still simplified, but definitely realistic. The touches of abstraction would be probably like changing the sky to yellow and making the figure seem much more simple and grouping the trees into just general shapes. Where am I? Along the way, I had some missteps. Every time I changed a series and was looking for new things to paint or new content, I kept thinking that my problems would all be solved if I just changed mediums. So I tried acrylic and I tried oil. I tried switching back and forth between realism and abstraction and going towards more realism. I tried taking workshops so that I could learn to paint like someone else, to paint the right way. This painting was done about that same time, and we had moved out here to Oregon City, and I went out painting plein air with a lot of friends in that general time. I liked that. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I loved painting in oil. I found it challenging, but ultimately it didn't satisfy my my need to paint my true feelings. In 2012, I started a series that I call Down on the Farm. It was coming to be evident that my mom was really going to sell the farm. And I was preparing myself and thinking about this for what was coming down the pike. I knew it was coming. It was obsessing me. I couldn't think of anything else. And rather than paint the farm in a realistic way, which didn't express my feelings about the place, I decided to take on a colorist approach and use an aerial view. So if this painting looks non-objective, it's not. It's looking down on the buildings and the fields, the shapes of the fields, the river running through the back of the property, the neighbor's property and house and trees, and infusing that subject with color and mark making to become symbolic. I think all art for me is symbol. We paint to communicate. We paint to communicate the beauty that we see around us, to communicate our inner feelings. And whatever we choose to paint becomes more universal. In sharing what attracts us, we share some of ourselves. I think of abstraction as a spectrum that a painting can be towards realism or towards abstraction, fully realistic, fully abstract, fully non-objective. But always for me, my paintings are a narrative, a way of telling myself a story. This painting is called My Father's Eyes, and I began just by painting a mushy field of color that reminded me of his eyes. He had very crystal clear blue eyes. And that was the part of his eyes that I really wanted to paint. Not the shape, not the expression, just that color. And so in this, you can see sort of an eye-like shape that for me references what my dad's eyes were. We're coming back to the part where you're gonna have to type things into the chat. In the chat box, I would like you to type what colors you see, what shapes you see. I would like you to type in what type of organization you see in this piece and what kind of marks or lines you see. And if I give you the title, which is Two Sides, I would like you to guess at the inspiration. Ready, set, go. Anybody?
Yeah, you got to give people a moment. You asked a lot of questions.
I'm sorry, Ruth, did you want us to put a title or what guess a title?
I want you to see if you can say what you see in the colors, okay, what you see in the shapes, how the painting is organized. So someone has typed blues, definitely, yes. Green, orange, blue. Is it a butterfly? An explosion cascading from the top right in a night sky. Ooh, that's neat. So how do you think the title might, Two Sides, light and dark? There you go. Organized around one large shape with smaller shapes around it. Yes. Scratching through the white to the color underneath. Yes. Mostly cool colors, mostly big shapes. Good. Organized into squares, just juxtaposed with curvilinear. Good, good. So keep sharing, that's great. I think it's interesting for you each to see what others are observing. For me, the inspiration was two sides of an idea, two sides of a discussion. I tried to organize it in a bridge-like way, trying to bridge this divide, this canyon. And I wanted to use this line to connect the two sides, back and forth, very gesturally. One of the things that I did when I started painting abstractly was look at other artists' work who were painting non-objective work and find out what attracted me to their work. And one of the things that was consistent was line, and I didn't use line in my work at that time. So I set a goal to include more line in my paintings. And one thing that helped me get over that, the feeling of discomfort in doing that, was that I was teaching a class and writing something on the board, and someone said, "Oh, you have the most beautiful handwriting," but I really don't. What I realized was that this student liked me, and they were identifying my handwriting with me. Just like if I saw my grandmother's handwriting, it would bring her right back to me. Or if I saw my mother's handwriting or my best friend from college, if I saw her handwriting, I could just visualize her face. We identify so much with the handmade mark. We feel the person when we see their marks, and no one can imitate another person's mark completely. So for a whole year, I resolved to include line in each painting that I did. And it really helped me to become more comfortable with it. One of the pitfalls that I encountered was overcoming fear of making marks or making something that people couldn't recognize or wouldn't like or wouldn't understand. When I made something totally new, it looked to me like an ugly stranger walking into the room, someone that I didn't recognize. It takes time to become comfortable with a new language. And one of the things I did to help myself with that was to take time and let the painting rest between the creation and the evaluation, allowing my eyes time to adjust to the image, get a quick glance at it from the corner of my eye or a fresh view. The other thing I encountered as a pitfall was too many ideas of what to paint, a lack of focus. And one of the things I did to overcome that was to work in a series and keep a list of different facets of ideas about the farm, how I might approach them. So I organized the ideas by season. So some of the ideas were memories from the summertime. Some were memories from the winter. Some were planting memories, and some were harvest memories. Just different holidays, different birthdays, all the different memories I had of the place, different rooms in the house. I did one painting based on the bathroom that my sisters and I shared. And all of those potent memories, it was a way for me to memorialize the place in a very personal way. What came out of that was that people recognized the passion in the work. They might not realize that this painting that I called Vessel was about my frustration and anger, but they could feel the emotion. This painting I made on the day that my mom announced that she was selling the farm. And I really poured my heart and soul into that. My frustration, my tears, everything went into this painting. And it's very personal to me. When I moved toward abstraction, it was a major key for me to create work that's more personal, passionate, expressive, satisfying. This particular image I made about harvest. I worked in the field, and oftentimes in the heat, you could see a shimmer of light coming across the field. And this was in the National Watercolor Society and won the Loa Ruth Sprung Award. A very proud moment for me. This one is called Letting Go. I started to experiment with using veils of thin acrylic paint with my watercolor and some Stabilo pencil. In 2016, this painting was included in the American Watercolor Society. It's based on the experience of walking to the end of the quarter-mile driveway in the dark without a flashlight, dodging mud puddles and listening to the crickets and the tree frogs. I tried using more pattern in this, which was not as normal for me, these grid-like shapes, and mark making, value, beneath the surface, ideas of what happened on the farm before I was there, what would happen later, roots beneath the surface of the soil, artifacts that came up during the tilling of the soil, like arrowheads and Native American tools, but also the double meaning of what was happening beneath my surface, beneath my facade, emotionally. And I think the line in this work really implies that. And there's a lot of turmoil. I like to begin my paintings now with these titles beneath the surface, titles that have multiple layers of meaning. And it really helps me to define the feeling I want to create in the painting. This is a photo of the farm on the last day that we were able to be there, Valentine's Day 2015. And I've painted from this idea several times. There was a small pond out here surrounded by trees, and you can just make out a bald eagle in the top of those trees waiting to prey on the newborn lambs. So where do you begin? Here's the question. When you want to paint abstractly or more loosely, I begin first by choosing a rich, deep subject matter. I always take on the content before I take on the form. So do I want a feeling of joy? Do I want a feeling of sadness or mystery? What is it that's the specific thing that I am painting? Next, I write down all the different facets of that idea, the essentials. I try to abbreviate it into a title. As I move along, I break that down into design elements. Which elements would be the best to express that? Then I think of composition, the principles of design, how I might organize that subject. Would it be a grid? Would it be an S? Would it be repetition? Would it be contrast? I can't emphasize enough the importance of these ideas. If I tried to paint just another landscape, I would not be including enough of my personal emotion in the piece. If I tried to paint everything that was in my heart, it would freak me out. Sometimes something so big in your life, you could never express it in paint, and it almost paralyzes you. So thinking about facets of that idea helped me, and working in a series helped me. And I don't mean to imply that abstraction is the only way to do that. I'll answer some of these questions in a little bit, but so for example, here's a painting by Andrew Wyeth where the personal specifics become very universal. And the feeling in this realistic painting goes beyond Christina's specific situation as a disabled woman isolated on a farm to encompass anyone who's ever struggled or felt alone. another artist that I admire, Felicia Van Bork. Her series is called it's a how-to series, and all of the pieces, they're collages that she's done in the series begin with how to divide and and this one's how to divide and multiply. It's a collage, and at first glance I thought it was non-objective, but the longer I looked at it, I see a tree with apples falling from it. She has one called How to Console the Queen, How to Bridge an Ocean, all these very evocative titles. They're always how to do something impossible. And Joan Mitchell, these very gestural marks to imply trees, very personal mark making. Here's an artist painting a scene been very familiar to me as a kid, jumping off the rope swing into the river. Summer day on the rope swing. And this is definitely one way to paint the subject, to portray it. We see very strong mark making and brushwork. It feels gestural and great color temperature and strong value contrast. And it's a beautiful way to render it. I chose a different way. For me, I wanted to distill the experience down into just the motion, just the fearlessness of jumping off a very light little tether into a pool of water. I chose to emphasize line for that because I thought that the fluidity would really express that motion. And then the stability of this straight line for me represents the tree. So we can see a spectrum between realistic, abstract, and non-objective. And I'll show you a few of my paintings that I feel like explore that. So the definition of realism: the artist begins with a visual reference and ends with an accurate representation. Abstraction: the artist begins with a visual reference from reality and translates that into the design elements. So for me, this tree, I translated it into thousands of little hatch marks and some gestural brushwork. This is watercolor and gouache. And the same subject as a non-objective painting. The artist begins without a visual reference from reality, perhaps an idea, a process, or a memory. This piece is about 11 by 15. So you can see between this piece and this piece, I was letting go of reality more and more. The hatch marks from this piece were repeated in this piece, but less of them. They become more important because there are fewer of them. I used a design emphasis of color and a T-shaped design or a cruciform design. I like to think of my work as an experiment, and each painting is a different experiment in expression. So you can see the reference, the place where I was when I painted these pieces, and then the different interpretations on each side. If I put the pressure on myself that the one painting is going to tell the whole story, it's paralyzing. And so each time I think, oh, I'll try it this way, I'll try that. The what if questions really help me to progress forward in my work. What if I try it with a color emphasis? What if I try it with a line emphasis? What if I work with shape? Here's a painting of the last day where I worked with shape. These are both 22 by 30, both acrylic. And the one on the right has collage. So you can see my reference, my idea, and my interpretations where I've distilled it down. I've used this arcing shape to indicate before and after, and I've used the value changes in both of them to indicate this before and after. I didn't just end there though. I kept working at it. I kept trying different things. In 2017, I did these, much more gestural on the left and more of a planned composition on the right, in keeping with this arc, playing with the idea of symmetry. And again in 2020, I have tackled this. And I feel that I will probably tackle it again. It's a subject that has come up over and over. For me, whether the painting ends up as abstract or non-objective is irrelevant. For me, the idea is for me to get the idea out of my head and my heart and onto the page. I think that how we express ourselves is a personal decision and often changes gradually, as my changes have been. This piece is, I would call it non-objective. I painted it completely from imagination, although it relates to a specific memory. It's indicating my dad's pant leg, where he would, during harvest time, roll up the cuff of his Levi's and put his spent cigarette butts in those to prevent forest fire. So this is a watercolor and gouache, 22 by 30. It's called Effigy. And the title to me indicates it's a twofold, double layered meaning. Effigy could be a place to celebrate or revere someone, and it could also be a place of protest or a symbol for that person. This one is called Learning to Fly. Taking those shapes, changing them, experimenting with them, layering the color. I really find the color for me is my favorite element. Line is probably a close second. This one is oil and cold wax on panel. The title is Artifact, and I was thinking in terms of what we leave behind in places that we've lived, what the Native Americans left behind on our property, what my mother would leave behind, how she made her mark on the land, her garden, the house, those sort of things. How do we judge abstract and non-objective work if we don't know that it looks like what it's supposed to look like? I mean, when we do realistic work, we know the painting looks accurate. It portrays an emotion, but it also looks right. But with abstract and non-objective work, we don't have that indicator. I look for unity, variety, dominance, repetition, pattern, all the design principles. And I also look to see whether the changes, the marks, the expression that the artist has made amplifies or enhances the meaning of the work in abstract. And in non-objective, oftentimes, I had a class one time, I showed a totally non-objective painting by Marilyn Huey Phyllis, and she had written to me about it, that it was about her husband's death from cancer. And she had specific symbols within the work that were not recognizable imagery. I had 20 women in that class, and 3 of them came up to me afterward and told me that before I mentioned anything about the motivation for the work, they saw cancer. I think that some people will receive our messages of realism with the intent that we had, and some people won't. The same goes with abstraction and non-objective work. I always work to express, not to impress. When I put pressure on myself to impress people, I freeze up, my work looks cramped. And if my ego gets in the way, the same thing happens. I always check my ego at the door. I feel that painting abstractly has made me a more free, realistic painter. This was done this summer from a memory of France last year, and interpreting the scene with random color choices as an exercise, as a starting point, trying to make it hang together. As a challenge. I like to challenge myself, give myself restraints by saying, okay, you can only use these 3 colors plus black and white. I gave myself a puzzle to figure out, how am I going to express my feeling for this place using only 3 colors? I think anytime we put constraints on our process, we become more creative. So I just like to recap what I look for in abstraction. I look for strong subject, emotion, and then as I begin, I abbreviate my subject. I don't try to use every design element in the book. I break it down and limit my means of expression, and then I try to organize it. I've done a little video for you and a downloadable cheat sheet if you're interested in those. They're available for you to download on my website, rutharmitage.com ABC. So I'll take some questions if you're interested, and I'll type that link in the chat for you.
Thank you, Ruth. This
You're
has been
welcome.
wonderful. You want to go back to seeing people, or do you think you might?
I'm going to stop the share now. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, there we go.
Roll back. So if you want to unmute yourself, do so if you have a question.
Thank you, Ruth, for a lovely presentation. That was a wonderful, succinct, and overview of your approach and how we can look at transforming our images and our thought processes into new representations of our artwork. I really appreciate that. That was very, very
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I had one question in the chat. This artist says, I would disagree that abstract has to begin with a visual reference to any reality. And I think that the distinction I was trying to make here was the difference between abstraction and non-objective. So an abstract painting, actually all art is abstract because there's not an actual tree smacked on your canvas. It's a symbol for a tree. All of our art is abstract. It's just the degree of abstraction. And let's say you drew a realistic eyeball on your canvas. That's still not a real eyeball. It's a drawing in black and white. So you've removed the color by drawing it in black and white. Even though we call it realism, it's not really real. It's an abstraction. It's a symbol, just like the letter A is a symbol for the sound ah, ah, a, ah. It can make a lot of different things. It's a symbol. So non-objective is when you can't recognize what the subject is, or the artist didn't start with a recognizable subject. They may have just started with smearing some gesso on, just a process or something like that. Zoni, did you?
Please,
Yeah.
Ruth?
Yes.
Where do you draw the line between impressionistic and abstraction? Because I saw some of your art pieces were impressionistic more than rough and solid abstract. I always wanted to get your opinion on that.
For me, that's like saying, is fusion cooking Asian or American? You know, it's both. So it's not necessarily something I try to define. I just know where I want to be when I find it. And sometimes I don't know. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 paintings to get to the point where this is where I want to be. Oh, finally I got there. And I don't really know that I'm driving from this point to San Francisco. I know I'm headed south. I know that I'm headed south, and I want to get towards San Francisco, but I might stop at an estate sale and a museum and a garage sale on the way there and eventually get to the De Young. You know, it's okay for me to take those detours.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Ruth, hi, January over here.
Hello.
I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate your method of organizing to start your painting and your thought processes through. Very interesting and a very intelligent way of doing that.
Oh, thank you. Well, my science background helps me to break things out, I think.
Well, it's a good background to have then.
I wanted to ask, do you start with any sort of a sketch or a little drawing or something before you start using the paint?
Yeah, I do sometimes. Yeah, I'll do a little thumbnail, or sometimes I'll do a color study.
Mhm.
Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just go with the idea that I'm going to explore symmetry. I'm going to explore something right down the center and do it as symmetrical as I can while still keeping it imbalanced. You know, I'll set myself an impossible task and say, oh, how could I do that? How could I say there's something impossible on this side, letting go of the farm, and there's something impossible on this side, keeping the farm. We can't do either one. I'm sorry. We just have to give up. There's no way.
One of the things I do, and I was wondering if you do that, I start with little thumbnails of a vertical and a horizontal.
Oh yeah, the format can really change it.
Vision.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thank
Do
you.
you do a lot of mixed media, Ruth, like between your watercolors and acrylic, or do you do that? a
I
lot?
do. Oftentimes with watercolor, I'll start with pure watercolor and then move towards acrylic or gesso or gouache or crayon. And my oil paintings, I'll start sometimes with acrylic and go over with oil.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't have any hesitation to do that.
Ruth, can you
Yes.
repeat what you said about restraining?
When we restrain what we
Restraint.
have to use, so we give ourselves limitations,
About color, yeah.
then you have to get more creative. If you don't have every tool in the book, how are you going to do it? You have to be creative that way. Just putting those constraints on ourselves forces the hand to be more creative.
So you're talking about restraint of maybe color choice and your tool choice.
Or
and
line, just only line. You can only use line, or just using shape
elements, your
or
element
those
choice.
elements, or saying in your principles sheet, you could say, well, this principle, repetition, I'm really going to focus on that in this painting. I'm really going to focus on using repetition.
Okay.
And how would that amplify this idea of cobblestones, for example?
And where in the Willamette Valley was your farm near? 'Cause
Oh, it's
I've been to the
between Albany-
Willamette many times, wine tasting in the Carlton. And
Oh yeah, we were south of there about 45 minutes between Albany and Corvallis, not too far from I-5.
Been to Corvallis too.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I just want to say I appreciate the emotional content and how you use that as an approach. I come from a pretty hardcore, pure abstraction background, like from childhood on, and your approach is pretty much the polar opposite of mine. And it's really interesting to me. I mean, it's what you're doing is so autobiographical.
Yeah, I
And
was an English major. Words matter to me.
yeah. Well, and I write like crazy. So a lot of my sort of autobiographical content comes out in writing.
Yeah,
And then when I'm in front of the canvas, it's literally sort of a Zen, go blank state and dive into this white canvas, which can be terrifying. So it's
Yeah.
the opposite. But I really loved watching your work go from what I would call representational to
Yeah.
pure abstraction. And
Yeah.
you're your work that I resonate the most with obviously is the work that was purely abstract, and it's beautiful. It's really nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Thanks.
And it was a struggle. I mean, there was a lot of fear going into it because I had artist friends who paint abstractly say, "You think you can just paint abstractly now?" Like, well, no, I don't, but I have to.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
I don't think I can, but I have to. You know, I can't paint it the way I want to paint it. It just won't come out. It just won't. I wanted to paint it realistically. I did. I wanted to paint it abstractly, but it didn't say what I wanted it to say. So I had to do it in non-objective, pure abstraction.
Ruth, you still do any realistic art, or are you totally into abstraction now?
Well, the painting that I showed of the scene from France, that realism, that was done this summer. So I do feel like the abstraction really informs my realistic painting. I do still go out plein air painting with friends occasionally. I would say the bulk of my work is abstract, but it's not that I don't like realistic work. I like to do it and I like to look at it. I just thought it would be interesting for people to see how my work changed over the years based on I guess based on how I was feeling and what felt natural to me. I'm always worried when I do realistic work. I'm always worried that it's not going to be right. And the nice thing for me when I paint abstractly is nobody's going to say, well, that doesn't look like hot wind. Well, I don't care. It says it to me.
And Ruth, then I'm thinking about what the word figurative comes to mind. Because the abstract, like the abstract expressionists, there were, Pollock and all of them were into their, the abstraction. And then when some of them broke away and started going back to figurative, they were ostracized from that movement.
Right.
So
artists can be so hard on each other.
But I mean,
on ourselves.
So judgmental. It becomes so judgmental.
That abstractionist fall from grace. You really kind of can't go back, right? That's sort of that old school attitude.
I don't know about that.
I
Don't
really
tell me
like-
I can't.
I mean, I'm not saying I agree. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying I'm aware that was in the water.
Right.
Back then. Yeah.
I really like the difference you stated between abstraction and non-representational. I think we all use the word abstraction wrong.
That's the point I really wanted to make. That's the point I really wanted to get across today, because I do it myself. I'm very guilty of it. Because I see my non-representational paintings as abstractions of my experience, but all art is abstract, but non-representational, non-objective painting is different than abstract painting. So
I think I would call it representational painting that is abstracted, and rather than the word abstraction. I think it's abstracted work.
And that's why I say it's moving toward abstraction, and it's a spectrum.
Right.
It's not like you can say, this is the number 2 and this is the number 5. It's not like that. Art is visual experience.
Right.
There's a difference.
Can I say something? I think that we sometimes give too much attention to the labels and then spend a lot of time spinning our wheels trying to decide, what is
it 2 or 5?
And does it really matter? Because when I think of abstract, or when I thought about your talk today, not really knowing your work, I imagined that it was going to be like a lot of wispy color that sort of doesn't coalesce into any real form. And a lot of people do call that abstract. And it's not something I can really relate to, but when you were showing your work and you've got these gorgeous forms in there that aren't anything specific that I can and I don't want to look at them and say, oh, this is this or this is that, because that ruins it for me. I just want to feel it.
But I've organized it in a way that's meaningful to me. So the
Exactly.
night walk, I imagine myself weaving around those mud puddles. You couldn't
Right.
walk straight down that driveway or you would step in a mud puddle this deep.
But that's you know, it's your personal thing. But when I look at it, I don't even
You
necessarily.
don't have to, it
know
doesn't
that.
have to say that
Yeah.
to you, right?
Right.
It can be a city at night, or it can be anything at night.
Yes.
The art is beautiful, Ruth, and at the same time, the titles are so supplemental. I mean, I thought in abstract, it's harder to put a title.
That's
But
why I start with the title. And then
You
if
do?
I can do the
Oh.
title, if I can paint the title, then I know I'm finished.
Hmm.
I would encourage you to visit my website. I have some other articles on my blog about painting abstractly. And like I said, I have this sort of a downloadable PDF that is that same idea of abbreviating, breaking it down, and organizing it into a composition. So some different thoughts for you in a video that I worked very hard on.
Ruth, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. That was some lovely work. You talked about painting in series. When you're painting in series, do you do the series simultaneously? In other words, you have more than one going of the same idea?
Generally I have a main series, and then I have little side detours, like when I was doing Contented Solitude, I pretty much just did Contented Solitude. When I had been doing Down on the Farm, I'm mostly doing that. Although, like the last day, I would say it's a subset of Down on the Farm. It's still related to the farm, but it's a subset.
I guess my question is more practical in terms of, do you have one or more canvases going in the same time of the same subject?
No, I generally do one piece at a time.
Okay.
Unless, well, I do oil. And so sometimes I'll do a watercolor while I'm waiting on the oil to dry.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so that has changed my process quite a bit, but I love the flexibility of oil and the creaminess of it and all of that. So this past fall, I've been really, I did a big painting that it's not quite finished yet, but it was mostly acrylic. And then in the final stages of it, I've done oil on it. So that has satisfied my need to work on one painting until it's done, and yet still get that oil paint in there.
And what's the largest format you tend to work in?
My normal range is 22 by 30 to 36 by 48, but I've done 4 or 5 paintings that are on a door, 6 foot tall, 3 foot wide, you know, several paintings like that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other
Anybody
questions?
else?
Any questions? Thank you very much. I think.
Yes.
I think-
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.